Hello everyone, I'm Raijin Rising, and it's insane how any show's music can turn its images to 11. In this video, I'm going to rank my top 10 scores for RWBY Volume 7. Before I begin, I have to say this was incredibly difficult. Volume 7, as episodic as it is, gives the score the ability to match the different new form of pacing and really have different melodies stand in for that portion of the story arc. For instance, In the Shadow of Atlas is exceptional at putting the listener in the moment of the heroes flying through Mantle, and establishing it as an uncertainly hostile environment. I listen to it, and I immediately feel what the characters did. I decided to use the following questions as rough guidelines for how to analyze these scores. The more of these one excels in, the higher it would be. Note that this is just my way of it, and some of these probably won't matter to you, or you may think of entirely different questions, so no duh, your top 10 will be different. Again, like I said about RWBY Volume 7's vocal tracks, I won't be getting that technical about the scores as pieces of music. Though there is a lot to say beyond my top 10, so I have some honorable mentions. Without further delay, here are my top 10 scores from RWBY Volume 7. Number 10, Mantle Overrun. Chapter 10 opens Volume 7's third act with a tracking shot showing just how hectic the grim invasion is. Mantle Overrun plays from here until Ironwood reveals Salem to the Kingdom of Atlas. Starting with the grim invasion at the top of the track, the music begins fast-paced as the screen is black, and once the images are shown, they carry that hectic energy too. As the score goes, it uses leitmotif of From Shadows, I Burn, some grim theme, and others as the relevant characters are shown. When the piece shifts to the portion for when Ironwood and Robin address the kingdom, it takes on a new air and Divide plays on piano. If I'm completely honest, this portion of the track is what earned it a spot on this list. Seeing the grim battles that occur as Ironwood talks about Salem's goal and having that theme play, it really does it. Then the hectic tempo of the track's beginning is all gone, and from there, Divide transitions into a faster yet hopeful piece with piano, strings, and brass. Hopeful as in, it's literally called the Hope theme, from people who are smarter than me who've broken down RWBY's music. A little bit of John's, Amity's, and Ironwood's themes round it out as well, and after that, Watts and Tyrion have a plan to rethink. Number 9, Then You Trained Us. This Chapter 12 score is phenomenal to listen to. It is the score for the first half of the fight between Team RWBY and the Aesops, and it is a major contributor to that spectacle. Heavily distorted guitar and other accompaniment tied very well to the actions on screen. What more could you want? It's a great piece, really. I felt like I had to include it here because of how well it goes with the fight and the fact that it's great whether or not you're watching the fight as you listen. It holds its own as a track, but there are other tracks in this album that have more than just their fight in them, and for what they do, Then You Trained Us just has to be lower on the list for me. I don't have much else to say about this one, but it's all good fun. Number 8, Enjoy the Cake. Enjoy the Cake is the score for about half of Chapter 4. It plays when Amity Coliseum moves toward the mines as the heroes and Aesops emerge, and later when the heroes gain their huntsman licenses and enjoy the cake. After the non-stop energy that is Chapter 3, this score opens the next chapter softly to go well with the long-distance shot of the mines in Amity. It builds to an intensity that leads to the heroes and Aesops exiting the mines, and the heroes in awe of their new comrades. From there, it transitions into one of honor and grandeur, befitting of Ironwood granting them their licenses after all the trials and tribulations and the ideals they've upheld as only students. Then a light-hearted dinner theme, again as those smart folk call it, plays for the cake segment, and then RWBY and Crow take some time away on the stands. And though I really admire the portion that plays in the evening outside the mines earlier on, this is the part that seals it on this list for me. The transition occurs with a Red Like Roses leitmotif, Though to be honest, it sounds a lot like This Will Be the Day to me too. And the talk of Summer Rose occurs over Red Like Roses Part 2. Part of Volume 7's job as a set-up volume is to build Summer's narrative, and hearing Red Like Roses Part 2 in that way underneath really sealed the moment for me. After the Amity mission and granting of Huntsman licenses, it's a really good closer. Like Then You Trained Us, a lot of RWBY's music is there for the spectacle, is there to go beyond 11. But I very much enjoy when the music has a lower tempo and fits a more reverent feel. Enjoy the Cake is exactly that, and I had to have some of that rep in my top 10. Number 7, Party Crashers. I can't talk about Party Crashers without mentioning a score used for the fall of Beacon. If you've seen it, all I need to do to remind you of certain events is play this track. That's because Chapter 6, A Night Off, plays just about the same way as that episode. To a fault of its own, but that's not what we're here to talk about. As far as the score Party Crashers goes, it is just as effective at putting the listener in that moment. It is the score for Robin's preemptive victory rally through the end of the episode. It starts with some crowd noise, as well as everything that played for Robin's rally that wasn't Celebrate or Let's Get Real, which isn't much, but it succeeds at establishing the scene in the track. Watts gives Tyrion the go-ahead, and from there on, I don't need to see what's happening to know and to feel what's happening. I can hear Tyrion's wet work, I can hear when Penny takes action, when the lights come back on, when tensions rise when they go outside, and when Penny flies away. The choir piece for the distrust, the low piano for Penny's moment. What's curious to me is how well the piece leads into Looking Inward, the track that contains the first parts of Chapter 7 that immediately follow this. It's almost as if it was meant to be together. You know that the quiet shot of Penny in Pietro's lab was meant to be at the end of Chapter 6. Maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there, but that's what it looks like, and that's honestly kind of what I hoped it were. But let's move on. Just like Heroes and Monsters, as the calamity whose music completely sets those scenes, I get the feeling we'll remember Party Crashers for the same reason for a long time coming. Number 6, It Was Bait. There's a lot more to Ironwood and Watts' fight than just the fight. At the very least, well, there's this score, which plays for the scenes immediately before and after that fight. In Chapter 10, Watts falls into Ironwood's trap at Amity Coliseum, and in Chapter 11, Watts traps Ironwood in his hard light rings. Ironwood vs. Watts is one of the most well-choreographed, dare I say well-scripted, fights in the show's history. Amity Coliseum is Remnant's grandest stage, and this fight deserves that level of an audience. Part of this track's job is to match up with the grandeur to drive it home, and it does. The song Hero is introduced in these scenes, and I love how the end of It Was Bait, the cue for Ironwood breaking free of Watts' trap, uses Hero as leitmotif. It's only fitting to use the song telling of Ironwood's willingness for sacrifice when he makes that sacrifice. We are now in top 5 territory. Before I dive in, the top 5 of my list are all scores that I feel define their point in the story. The story beat does not have to be monumental, but this rank is reserved for the scores that go above and beyond. These scores are integral to our understanding of the story. Number 5, And I Refuse to Starve. It was tough to figure out the order between this and the one before, number 6, It Was Bait. But this landed higher for putting the listener in the moment just as much while containing the fight music and the music surrounding it. This track contains the cues for Penny's and Winter's scenes in chapters 12 and 13. First, they argue en route to the Maiden, and then their battle with Cinder ensues and gets to Freya. Volume 7 writes Cinder very well, and the score reflects that too. Once the fight starts and the score layers Penny's and Winter's themes over Cinder's chants while keeping to the action on screen, yeah, that's a yes from me. The cue for when Cinder approaches Freya fits well after the fight and before the maiden leitmotif picks up, and the cue for Freya's scenes after that close out the piece well. And I Refuse to Starve is wonderful. It works with Penny, Winter, Cinder, and Freya exceedingly well. It's in the top 5 for a reason. But of the 5 scores that I find go above and beyond to make their moments as meaningful as possible, I'm able to connect with the rest on that level a lot better. Number 4. Time to Do Our Jobs. This one is kind of an oddball score. Despite mostly being for Chapter 9, for the heroes and Aesop's rushing to save Mantle, it also has Blake and Yang's talk in the transport from Chapter 7 as they decide to go against Ironwood's orders and tell Robin about Amity. While that cue may seem like it's a better fit for full-on Vigilante based on the time frame, it would have been out of place there in tempo alone. There's too much action in that score for this to have led into it well or to have found a spot in the middle, especially given that the scores are chronological 99% of the time. Having the cue for Blake and Yang's scene be at the top of Time to Do Our Jobs makes a lot more sense given that the track overall builds intensity as it goes. It is the soft starting point. And here's the thing, it's a slow piano rendition of Trust Love. Then, once Ironwood agrees to trust others with the truth of Salem and orders for the heroes and Aesops to save Mantle, that is a more optimistic, hopeful rendition of Trust Love. And every time I hear it, it's this triumphant piece that sounds like Ironwood has really grown as a character and become someone who can finally lean on other people, hear them out, and trust a different viewpoint from his own. And because of that, the heroes are less divided, and it all seems all the more possible for the heroes to defeat Salem. All of that is in those notes. Then, as the score moves on to the cue for the flight down to Mantle, there's one last slow bit that finds room for a let's get real leitmotif before fully committing to building that intensity for saving Mantle, with the Grimm attacking their airship no less. I know this is a surprising score to see this high up, especially after I said the top 5 go above and beyond, but Trust Love leitmotif puts this score on its back and carries it. Maybe you're at odds with this ranking and you weren't fully behind Blake and Yang's decision to disobey Ironwood and tell Robin about Amity, but here's the thing, I was. Having Blake and Yang turn their feelings about killing Adam into action with Trust Love playing in the background, I love it. And then using Trust Love again for that rush to save Mantle, as I've said. Time to Do Our Jobs absolutely earns number 4. Number 3, Into the Mines. Into the Mines is the score for nearly front to back of Chapter 3. The mission into the mines to secure the Amity Tower launch site. That chapter is stellar for being its own smaller, contained story, starting up the Amity mission by warning of Grimm at the launch site, which they spend the rest of the episode taking down. Because of that, this score is itself a contained moment. The chapter opens with a short montage of scenes that transitions to the landing strategies and then to boots on the ground suspense and action. The end is, of course, bona fide Aesop's excellence. The self-containedness of this, the flow of one scene to the next in the Aesop's action piece are why this score is so high on my list. That being said, it could have been higher. The one downside this score has, to me, is the lack of the landing strategy scene. The musical transition that happens, the scene where Clover says, "I trust Ironwood with my life, so tomorrow I'll be trusting you all too," and then Oscar walking into frame and saying, "Hey, Ruby," and the scene cutting to the airdrop above the mines, the musical transition there hits every dang time. And it's not in this track. The reason the landing strategy cue is cut from the score is because it is in the song Touch the Sky. The song ends with all of the heroes touching the sky. But to integrate the cue into that song, it loses some of the music from the scene. Both the beginning and end of it are lost or changed, so they're lost to any official release outside of the episode. I wanted some version of this track to exist with the landing strategy cue in it, so I made it. If you're interested, there is a link in the description. Into the Mines tells a complete story through its music, despite leaving out a piece in the middle. So that puts it at number 3. Number 2, Are You With Me? This is the score for Chapter 11's scene in Ironwood's office. It starts with Ironwood's paranoia and ends with his arresting the heroes. It is one of the most pivotal scenes in the entire show, and the music excels at hitting all the different beats that it goes through. Ironwood calls everyone to his office to tell them the timeline has changed. The music sets the first tone and the scene is tense. He's paranoid, and he presses the heroes on how Robin knew about Amity. This intensity is now directed toward them. In saying loyalty always matters, well, that's Salem's cue. Divide plays, and there's this repetition of knocks that has been used before. Volume 3, Chapter 7, and Volume 3's finale. Now it's used here and later in Volume 7 as well. After Salem leaves, Ironwood turns expressionless and apathetic, which the score uses as an excuse to call back to the Brunswick Arc's music in tone. As Ironwood introduces a new plan, the music plays as a callback to Chapter 2 when he introduced his first plan. He goes on and it turns into a level of militaristic we've heard before in Volume 4 when he announces that he's closing Alice's borders. Arguing ensues and RWBY makes the play to tell those outside of the meeting about Ironwood. And from here on, Red Like Roses plays underneath everyone else's musical cues. The Aesops, Ironwood, Trust Love Again. The score overall, it really knew how to use Trust Love, the composers. You could say that Are You With Me is so high on this list partly because of its involvement with such an important scene in RWBY. And you'd be right. Part of what makes these scores so special is that they are adding to what we're seeing on screen. And when what we're seeing on screen is so important, and the score is adding to that in great ways, yeah, it compounds. And the same can be said for number 1. Number 1, The Enemy of Trust. The Enemy of Trust is at the top for the same reason Volume 4's No Safe Haven Part 2 is the best score from back then. Part of the score's job is to close the entire volume. Close all the character arcs, get the last major beats through, and set up for the next volume. Again, you could say that's the episode's job, but any score's job is to take the visuals to the next level of meaning. So therefore, it's the score's job too. Finale episodes are often my favorite from RWBY. Volumes 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7 do them wonderfully. RWBY has a habit of spending a lot of time in the short closing moments, drawing them out to get the absolute most out of them. And for me, that works. The Enemy of Trust comprises cues from the Volume 7 finale, from Oscar and Ironwood's scene in the vault through the end of the chapter. As Oscar and Ironwood talk and argue, it's as if their themes battle for space as well. And once Ozpin's theme plays, Ironwood's comes in stronger, with Divide playing alongside it. Atlas's theme plays as the camera holds on Ironwood, and he shoots Oscar. Tensions are at an all-time high in the next bit, when the camera cuts back and forth between Oscar and Penny's scenes. The music matches to both before jumping to a bit later in the episode since Casey Lee Williams' Until the End cuts in. Later on, Oscar is still falling as a fear cue plays for the first time. And this is the part that gets like No Safe Haven Part 2, as I mentioned earlier. Like that score, The Enemy of Trust winds its way through so many different themes as leitmotifs, while giving fear a good amount of prominence as well, all in service of wrapping up the volume. Winter's theme, then Penny's, then Neo's transitions into Cinder's, Ironwood's plays Fear Comes Back as Oscar lands, and Salem enters with that same 3-beat repetition that played under her in Ironwood's office. Here, it's given more detail and more dominance in the sound mix to fully announce her arrival. Maybe I'd like it more if the intro to Until the End were included here, or maybe it wouldn't make a difference. The Enemy of Trust is my favorite score from RWBY Volume 7. And now here are the honorable mentions. First off, I do kind of have to mention Free Ride in a Show. It is second only to The Enemy of Trust in runtime, and it missed my top 10 because... Okay, so it excels at timing the music to the moment. Beautifully, like, it's great for that, but it does it to the exact shot. And it's hard to know what, beyond broadly, is going on without the visuals. So I just wasn't able to connect with it nearly as much as maybe some others because of that. It ends well, though. So it shares a lot of qualities with Volume 6's Protecting Each Other, which is, again, fight scenes matched to the beats of the camera. But I do feel that Protecting Each Other does it a lot better. As I said at the top of the video, In the Shadow of Atlas is also fantastic, and it was a very narrow miss. It opens with the same cue as Volume 6 ends with because, well, it's that exact moment, it just makes sense. And the Mantle Exploration score really helps introduce the volume's trust theme, when loyalty is looking a little important. And okay, so none of my top 10 was of Watts or Tyrion's really unnerving score moments, which I do feel really bad about. The composers are great at writing spooky and unsettling music, which is great for those moments, but ultimately I connected with the other scores better. This goes for We All Have Our Talents, and Eat It Too, and Hey Mom, It's Snowing. Watts and Tyrion were always such engaging villains. Really love to hate both of them. And the score does them such justice. Yet, it's not a RWBY soundtrack without a lost score somewhere. Not every musical piece makes it to the soundtrack. Again, as I was talking about, Into the Mines. But the content creators Changuraptor and Sarah Tilgner recently made it super easy to listen to this volume's big lost score, the Team Funky piece from Chapter 5. It is a jazzy rendition of Neon for the most part, and it's not quite a minute long, so it's not long enough to be its own thing on the soundtrack. I have a link to it in the description though, and I'll play a little bit of it at the very end of this video. Now to begin wrapping things up. Overall, the RWBY Volume 7 score does a phenomenal job of using our understanding of musical themes, as well as the new songs for this volume, to get the most out of the scenes they play in. As the start of the Atlas arc, it also sets up plenty for Volume 8 to build from. And I'm interested to see where Volume 8 goes so we can look back on these tracks and see exactly what they were doing beyond just this volume. And I want to close this video with words from Changuraptor. Their RWBY score-only series has been instrumental to my ability to talk about RWBY's score in more videos than just this one. So please go give him a sub and Sarah Tilgner while you're at it, if you want to keep learning about RWBY's score. I really am standing on the shoulders of giants here, so if you like how I approach it, I do have two great people for you. So, Changuraptor mused for a while in their description for the Enemy of Trust's score-only video. Here we are, the Enemy of Trust. There's so much that could be mentioned here, but right now I want to highlight one small moment. That one Atlas motif we'd been hearing all volume, finally culminating with Ironwood fully going over the edge. It first appears in Volume 7's first episode, and appears in nearly every subsequent one. The motif has a mysterious quality, very much unlike the Atlas we've been used to hearing for years, and always seems to be there in moments where our heroes are unsure or things have gone against them. With trust being a central theme of the volume, I'd like to think this motif could represent distrust, but I'm not sure how accurate that descriptor would be. What I do feel confident in saying is that I believe it to be Volume 7's main motif, which is something I don't feel like any other volume has done before, and I enjoy that idea a lot. What are your top 10 or top 5 scores from this past volume? Let me know down below. While you're at it, like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. I'm Raijin Rising. Have a good one.